The sun hadn't yet crested the ridges when the town square came alive with whispers. Dust hung in the morning air like a veil, stirred by the boots of merchants setting out their wares and the restless hooves of horses tied to rails. But it wasn't trade or wagons that drew eyes that morning. It was the girl tied to the post. Her wrists were bound with coarse hemp rope, the kind used for cattle, and the fibers bit deep into her skin. A strand of her dark hair clung to her cheek, matted with dried tears and the dust of the street. She stood barefoot in the dirt, her dress torn at the shoulder, the hem stained. A crude sign had been nailed above her head, for shame. The townsfolk didn't need to ask who she was. Everyone knew. The drunk's daughter. Some passed by with tight lips, pretending not to look. Others slowed, relishing her humiliation. A few children pointed, their mothers pulling them away quickly. As though her disgrace were catching Dot, an old woman muttered, "She's no better than him." A man laughed. Guess shame runs in the family. And above it all, the girl kept her eyes down, biting her lip until blood mingled with dust. She had learned long ago that words hurt less if you didn't meet them head-on. But she could not close her ears. Each whisper lodged like a thorn. Her father had tied her there himself, staggering with whiskey on his breath, declaring before half the town that she was useless, lazy, and a curse. His words slurred, his hands steady only when he cinched the knots. When the sheriff looked the other way, nobody dared intervene. Nobody ever did when it came to Caleb Rourke, mean drunk that he was. The morning dragged like a noose tightening. Flies buzzed. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but worse was the thirst. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth, her lips cracked from the sun. Shame burned hotter than the rising heat. Dot, and then Boots stopped in front of her. Dot. She raised her head just slightly, expecting another sneer. Instead, she saw him, the lonely rancher. He stood tall, hat shadowing his face, coat dusty from the trail. He was a man apart. Folks said he kept to his land outside of town, spoke little, drank less. He had a scar that ran from his jaw to his neck, half hidden by stubble, and eyes that didn't linger long on anyone. Now, those eyes rested on her. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, just studied her as though deciding if she was even real. She braced herself for words, mockery, insult, maybe pity, anything but silence. Then, slowly, he reached into the satchel slung at his side. From it, he pulled a piece of bread plain, hard, travel-worn. He tore it in half, and without a word, he held it out. The crowd's whispering rose into a buzz. She don't deserve that? Is he mad? He'll share her shame. Fool rancher. The girl stared at the bread. Her stomach cramped with need, but pride warred with hunger. If she took it, she'd give them something new to jeer about. If she refused, she might collapse before sundown. His hand remained steady. He wasn't mocking, wasn't pitying. Just offering. Dot at last, her shaking fingers reached out. She broke off a piece, small as a bird's bite, and put it to her lips. The bread was dry, rough, but it might as well have been manna from heaven. She swallowed, and something inside her, a knot of despair she'd carried too long, loosened. She dared to look up. She caught the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, not disgust, something else. Recognition, maybe. The sheriff's voice cut across the square. "That'll do, rancher." The lawman stepped forward, boots crunching in the dust. He was broad, his badge gleaming like judgment. "You feed her, you take her burden. You want to carry her shame? Then untie her and bring her home. Otherwise, best walk away." The rancher didn't flinch. His gaze stayed on the girl. Then, with quiet finality, he reached for the rope. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he loosened the knots. Her arms fell free, trembling from hours of restraint. She staggered, and before she could fall, his hand steadied her elbow. The sheriff. "Spat, you'll regret this." The rancher ignored him. To the girl, he said nothing, just pressed the rest of the bread into her palm. Her lips parted. The question slipped out in a whisper meant only for him. "Why would you care?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tipped his hat, turned, and began to walk Dot. The choice was hers: stay in the dust where shame had bound her, or follow the stranger who'd broken the rope. The townsfolk watched, murmuring, waiting to see which she would choose. She clutched the bread tight against her chest, and though her knees trembled, though her throat burned with fear, she took a step, then another. The dust swallowed her bare feet as she followed the lonely rancher out of the square. With every whisper behind her, one thought burned in her mind like a prayer. Maybe I'm not nothing after all. The trail out of town stretched long and empty, the kind of road where silence spoke louder than words. The girl kept her distance at first, a few paces behind the rancher, clutching the bread he had given her as if it were treasure. Dust rose around her bare feet, sticking to her skin like shame that wouldn't wash away. He didn't look back. Not once. His strides were steady, purposeful, as though he knew where he was going and didn't much care if she followed. For a while, she thought about turning back. The town was cruel. Yes, but it was familiar cruelty. Out here, with a man she barely knew, she could vanish into the wild without a trace. Yet each time her steps faltered, the bread in her hand reminded her. Someone had seen her hunger and done more than whisper about it. By midday, the sun beat down relentless. The rancher finally stopped where a stream cut through the scrubland. He knelt, splashing water over his face, then motioned for her to drink. She knelt, hands trembling, and drank greedily. The cold water shocked her parched throat, spilling down her chin. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and glanced at him. "You ain't asked me my name," she said softly. He shrugged. "Ain't mine to take." "You'll say it if you want to." That silenced her. In town, everyone had thrown her name around like it was dirt. To hear it wasn't demanded, it unsettled her. He finally added, "Name's Jonah Hull." She repeated it in her head, letting it settle. Jonah Dot when they rose again. His horse followed, reins loose. Jonah didn't offer her the saddle, didn't treat her like some fragile thing. He simply kept walking. She understood the message. Walk if you can, ride if you must. By evening, the ranch appeared on the horizon. Not much to look at, just a squat house of sun-bleached wood, a barn with one side leaning, and a windmill creaking against the sky. Fences stretched out to corral cattle, but even from a distance she could see half were broken. Loneliness clung to the place like dust. Jonah opened the door, letting her step inside first. The air smelled of dry wood, leather, and faintly of tobacco. A table stood at the center, big enough for four, though only one chair looked regularly used. Two others were pushed against the wall. Coated in dust, her eyes caught on the mantel. A faded bonnet rested there, delicate and untouched. Jonah's gaze followed hers for a moment, then shifted away. Wash basins out back. Supper's beans and cornbread if the fire holds. Sleeps wherever you find it. She nodded. There was no welcome in his tone, but neither was there rejection. For her, that was enough. That night, the firelight flickered across his scarred face as he sat at the table, silent, chewing slowly. She ate opposite him, each spoonful filling not just her belly, but something emptier, something she'd never named. The silence pressed until she spoke just to break it. "Why'd you do it?" She asked. "Back in town. Why give me bread?" Jonah didn't look up. His spoon scraped the bowl. Finally, he said, "Because no one else did." Simple. Final. She waited, but he said no more. His silences, she realized, weren't cruel. They were just heavy with things unsaid. Days turned to a rhythm. Jonah rose before dawn, tending cattle, mending fences. She followed, awkward at first, but stubborn. He never asked her to help, never stopped her when she did. She mucked stalls, hauled water, burned her fingers trying to cook over the iron. Stove Dot when she cursed. He almost smiled. "You're no good with biscuits." He said one morning Dot, she shot him a glare. "And you are?" He lifted his hands, calloused and scarred. "Can't make much with these." Her laughter startled. Even herself. It spilled out raw, rusty like a gate hinge, but real. Jonah's eyes softened, though his lips stayed still. Little by little, the ranch began to feel less empty. But word traveled faster than wind in the west. One afternoon, as they rode fence lines, a pair of riders approached town gossips in the Malik. Flesh. They reined up, smirks plastered on their faces. "Jonah Hawley," one called. "Didn't reckon you for the charity type. Bringing home the drunk's shame, feeding her beans? Brave man." The other added with a chuckle, "Careful she don't drink your whiskey dry or follow her daddy's path." The girl's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth, but Jonah's hand lifted, silencing her. His eyes, hard as stone, fixed on the "Men? You done?" he asked. The riders chuckled again, muttering insults as they turned back toward town. Dust rose in their wake. Her fists clenched. "Why didn't you say something? Why let him talk like that?" Jonah looked at her calmly. "Words don't mend fences. Don't feed cattle. They'll blow away quicker than dust." She bit her lip. Maybe he was right. But still, it stung. The sting became a wound when Caleb Rourke returned. She spotted him first, her father, weaving up the path to the ranch one evening, bottle in hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt stained. "Thought I'd find you here," he slurred, pointing at her with a shaky hand. "My girl, my burden? And you," his gaze swung to Jonah, "you think you can steal her? Feed her? Make her yours?" Jonah stood still, unreadable. Caleb stumbled closer. "She's mine. You want her free of me? Pay up. I'll take coin. Or whiskey, don't matter. Else I drag her back to town myself." The girl's heart thundered. Shame and rage tangled inside her. "I ain't yours, Pa. Not anymore." Caleb's hand whipped up, fingers curled to strike, but he never landed the blow. Jonah's hand caught his wrist midair, grip like iron. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, Caleb's wild and bloodshot, Jonah's steady as stone. "Let go," Caleb spat. Jonah's voice was low, calm, but carried the weight of a man who didn't bluff. "You raise a hand to her again, you'll lose it." Caleb jerked free, stumbling back. Around them, the dust seemed to hold its breath. A few neighbors passing the road slowed, watching. "You'll regret this," Caleb snarled, pointing a crooked finger. "Both of you." Then he staggered off into the twilight, curses fading into the wind. The girl stood frozen, breath sharp in her chest. Jonah turned to her, his hand dropping from the revolver at his hip. "You all right?" he asked. She swallowed. Hard nodded. But inside, she knew this wasn't over. Caleb's threats never ended in words alone, and as the sun bled out over the horizon, painting the land red, she realized her fight was no longer just against Shame Dot. It was against her own blood. The days after Caleb's threat were thick with unease. The girl, her name finally given to Jonah one quiet evening as Clara found herself glancing over her shoulder at every gust of wind that rattled the shutters. Jonah said little, but he checked his rifle more often, oiled the revolver at his hip, and rode the fence lines with a vigilance that made the cattle restless. Something was coming. Clara felt it in her bones. It came on a moonless night. A sound reached her first, a distant creak, unnatural against the steady drone of crickets. Clara stirred in her bedroom near the hearth. The ranch house was dark, but she could see the faint outline of Jonah sitting in the chair by the door, hat pulled low, rifle resting across his knees. He had heard it too. A sharp crack split the night, the splintering of wood, and the lowing of cattle, frantic and panicked. Clara's stomach dropped. Jonah was already on his feet. "Stay inside," he ordered, voice flat but urgent. But Clara shook her head, fire rising in her chest. "They're cutting the fences." He didn't argue, just threw open the door. The night erupted into chaos. Flames licked the barn, casting wild shadows across the corral. Dark figures moved through the dust, torches in hand, whooping as cattle stampeded into the open desert. Gunshots cracked, bullets sparking against the trough. Clara froze on the porch. She recognized the voice in the dark, ragged with drink, her father's. "Burn it down, boys. Let him taste what it's like to lose everything." Her blood went cold. Jonah's rifle roared, the muzzle flash tearing through the dark. One of the raiders dropped, rolling in the dirt. The others scattered, firing back blindly. Bullets whined past, shattering wood. Clara ducked, heart hammering, but something inside her rebelled against hiding. This wasn't just Jonah's fight. It was hers too. She sprinted toward the barn. Smoke stung her eyes, flames clawing at the dry timbers. A horse screamed from inside, trapped. She grabbed the latch, searing her palm, and yanked it open. The heat was suffocating, but she plunged inside anyway, coughing, cutting the ropes of the terrified animal. It bolted past her into the night. Behind her, Jonah cursed. "Clara!" She stumbled out, hair singed, coughing hard but alive. Ripped again. Jonah stood in the open, steady as a mountain, his rifle kicking against his shoulder. Each shot was measured, deliberate. He wasn't a man who wasted bullets. 2 more raiders fell back, cursing, but there were too many. Caleb staggered forward, torch in one hand, revolver in the other, eyes wild. "She's mine, Jonah. Always has been. You can't save her from me." Jonah's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, drawing his revolver. Clara's breath caught as the 2 men squared off in the firelit dust. Her father and the man who had given her bread. The outlaws circled, hungry for blood. Clara's mind raced. She spotted the old water trough overturned near the well, buckets scattered. Without thinking, she grabbed one, filled it, and dashed toward the barn, dousing the lower flames. The fire hissed, but it wasn't enough. Another bucket, another dash. Her arms ached, lungs burned, but she kept moving. Jonah's revolver thundered, dropping another outlaw. But a shot rang back, and he staggered, hit in the shoulder. He gritted his teeth, firing again, refusing to fall. Clara screamed, running toward him, but Caleb blocked her path. "Don't you run to him." Caleb roared, spittle flying. "You're mine, girl. You'll always be mine." His revolver aimed straight at her chest. Now time seemed to freeze. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. Every insult, every slap, every drunken curse from her. Childhood burned through her like wildfire. Shame had chained her to that market post, but Jonah had cut the rope, and she wasn't going back. Her voice rose above the roar of flames and gunfire. "I'd rather die here than be your daughter another day." The words hit him like a bullet. His hand trembled, eyes wild. Ungrateful little Jonah's revolver cracked. Caleb's gun spun from his hand, clattering into the dust. Outlaws faltered, their courage evaporating without Caleb's madness to drive them. Some fled into the dark, others fired wildly as they retreated. Within minutes, the ranch yard was silent, but for the hiss of smoldering wood and the frantic breathing of cattle in the distance. Clara dropped to her knees beside Jonah. Blood soaked his shirt at the shoulder, his jaw clenched against the pain. "You fool," he muttered, even as his good hand steadied her. Told you to stay inside and let you die? Her eyes burned with tears, streaked with ash. Not a chance. For the first time since she'd met him, Jonah almost smiled. It was faint, pained, but real. She pressed her hand against his wound, determined. You gave me bread, she whispered. I won't let you bleed for it alone. The barn was half charred, but still standing. The cattle were scattered, but many had not strayed far. By dawn, Clara was black with soot, Jonah pale with blood loss, but together they had saved more than either expected. The price was high, though. Caleb lay in the dirt, cursing weakly, humiliated before the men who had fled and the neighbors who had gathered in the aftermath. His words carried no weight, now only bitterness. As the sun rose, painting the land gold, Clara stood tall beside Jonah's wounded form. She wasn't the drunk's daughter anymore. She wasn't the girl tied to a post. She was the one who had fought fire with water, shame with courage, and in her chest a fierce ember burned. The fight wasn't over yet. Dawn broke slow and heavy over the valley, painting the ranch yard in tired shades of gold and smoke. The barn smoldered, half its timbers blackened, but still upright. The corral fence lay broken where cattle had burst through, wandering the sage-dotted plain, but Clara saw none of it. Her eyes stayed fixed on Jonah, slumped in the kitchen chair, his shirt torn, blood soaking the bandage she'd tied across his shoulder. His face was pale, jaw set like iron against the pain. You should rest, she whispered, wringing out a cloth in the basin and pressing it gently to his brow. I should mend fences. He muttered. Clara let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. You'd mend fences with one arm missing? His gaze flicked to hers, tired, steady, unflinching. You'd mend them for me if I asked. Her hand stilled. The words weren't command, weren't question. They were trust. And for the first time in her life, someone had given her that freely. By noon, word had spread. The sheriff rode up with 2 deputies, their faces set grim. Behind them came townsfolk, drawn by smoke and rumor. Clara's stomach twisted as she spotted her father among them, bound at the wrists, his face swollen from a fight he hadn't won. The sheriff swung down. Halle, he said, nodding at Jonah, then at Clara. Towns heard what happened. Rourke and his men'll face justice. You two got nothing to fear. But Clara knew better. Justice in the West was fickle. Her father wouldn't swing. He'd be fined, maybe jailed, then set loose again. A man like him never disappeared. He just festered. As if sensing her thoughts. Caleb spat into the dust. His eyes, bloodshot and bitter, fixed on her. You think you're better than me now? Standing with him, playing rancher's wife? He sneered, voice raw. You'll always be mine, girl. Blood don't wash away. Something inside Clara snapped, not like a twig, but like a chain. She stepped forward, shoulders straight, voice clear enough for all to hear. I'm not yours, not anymore. Her words cut through the murmurs like a blade. Caleb lunged as though the ropes on his wrists meant nothing, but the deputies yanked him back, shoving him toward the sheriff's horse. Jonah's hand brushed Clara's arm, steadying her. His voice was low, but full of weight. Chains only hold if you let him. She met his gaze, and for once she believed it. The days that followed were hard. The barn had to be rebuilt, cattle rounded up, fences mended. Jonah worked slow, favoring his injured arm, but Clara was everywhere at once, hauling timbers, driving strays back, cooking meals that tasted less like smoke each day. At night, they sat by the fire, silence no longer heavy, but warm, like a blanket spread between them. Clara told him stories of her childhood, the few bright ones buried beneath years of shame. Jonah shared little of his own, but once, when the fire burned low, he spoke of a wife who had died giving him a child that never breathed. I thought I was meant to live alone after that, he said quietly, staring into the flames. Thought it was punishment for not being enough to save them. Clara touched his scarred hand. Maybe it wasn't punishment. Maybe it was just waiting for the right reason to stop being alone. Their eyes met in the glow. He didn't speak, but his silence said more than words. Weeks passed. The gossip in town shifted. Where once people whispered about the drunk's daughter tied to the post, now they muttered about the girl who had fought fire and outlaws beside Jonah Hall. Some scoffed, some admired, but no one dared mock her openly. One evening, Clara baked bread. Real bread, not the hard trail kind Jonah had offered her that first day, but warm, soft loaves pulled from the iron stove, golden crusted and fragrant. She set it on the table, slicing thick pieces, and slid one across to Jonah. Turned to eat. Jonah stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not faint, not hidden in shadows, but a smile full and unguarded, as though something inside him had finally healed. Clara's chest swelled. The bread between them wasn't just food. It was a promise, a life not chained to shame or loss. A chance, fragile and fierce, to belong. That night, as the stars burned bright over the quiet ranch, Clara stood on the porch, feeling the cool night wind in her hair. The world felt wider, freer. She remembered the post in the square, the sign above her. Head, the whispers that had cut deeper than any rope. She remembered the piece of bread, dry and simple, offered by a man who owed her nothing. And she whispered into the dark, as if speaking to the land itself. One piece of bread changed everything. In the Wild West, shame could tie a person, tighter than any rope. But kindness, one small act, could cut through chains no one else dared touch. Jonah Hale gave Clara a piece of bread, and in return, she gave him reason to smile again. Together, they built something stronger than fences or barns. They built a life. Sometimes, the smallest gift spread, a hand. A word become the sparks that set the soul free. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your thoughts in the comments. And tell me, what would you have done? Walked past the girl tied to the post, or stopped with bread?